Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Hafade Zantero, welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and today we are talking restorative justice, in particular, the CNMI Drug Court. Our guest today is CNMI Superior Court Associate Judge Teresa Kim-Tenorio. Judge, welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour.
Hafade CNMI, thank you, Catherine, for having me on this show today.
Well, I'm really glad you're here. Maybe we could start off with, we're going to be talking about drug court. Why should those of us that maybe don't really feel we have an association with drugs or what's happening in the court be interested in this topic?
I think that everybody in the CNMI knows someone with a drug addiction or is related to someone with a drug addiction. And to say that it's just their problem, I think, is quite selfish. It's a community problem, and we need to recognize that. We need to recognize that we all have a role in helping those with addiction, whether it's just being supportive or just giving them that opportunity to prove themselves that they deserve a second chance. I think that's quite important. So what my goal is in treatment courts is to educate the community about the seriousness of the drug issues here in the CNMI, that drugs affect everybody. It does not discriminate. It can happen to the wealthy, the poor, the young, the old. We know that we have in juvenile court, we have children as young as 13, 14 experimenting with meth. And in drug court, I have participants in their 60s who are grandparents who struggle with drug addiction. So really, it is a community problem. And even though at this very moment you may think that you don't know anybody or it's not affecting you, it could in the future. Also, it could affect you in a different way. You could be a victim of a crime as a result of someone with an addiction. So I think that it's important for us as a community to embrace treatment courts and to educate ourselves and to understand the importance of treatment courts and restorative justice.
All right, so start us off with what is restorative justice versus punitive justice, and why are the courts moving more towards restorative justice?
Okay, so restorative justice is basically an approach where we take a holistic approach. We repair the harm by providing those who have been harmed with an opportunity to see their loved ones get treatment, and for those who have committed the crime to take responsibility for the harm and to communicate and address their needs in the aftermath of a crime. The first treatment court started in Miami-Dade County, Florida in 1989, and today there are over 3,400 treatment courts nationwide. The reason why we're moving towards restorative justice is because I like to use the definition of insanity. Insanity is doing something over and over again, thinking that you're going to get a different result. And obviously the punitive system is not working. Punitive justice does not work.
Which is basically just punishing the person and not trying to restore them to the community.
Correct. So they continue to commit crimes and they continue to go back, which increases our recidivism rate. So we want to move away from that. Catherine, treatment courts are the most researched criminal justice program in the nation.
Really?
It is, and it's proven to be successful. Nationwide, there's about a 70 to 80% success rate. So it's time to stop being insane and start moving towards something that works, and treatment courts work. As I stated earlier, it's a holistic approach. So the reason why the punitive system is insane is because we punish the crime, we don't rehabilitate the person, and really when we sentence someone, a criminal defendant in court, one of the goals is to rehabilitate. Of course, we incapacitate them to promote public safety by putting them in jail, but one of the goals is to rehabilitate, but we're not rehabilitating them, and we're not preparing them to reintegrate into society. So basically, for example, someone will serve 3 years. On the third year after they've completed their sentence, DOC opens the doors and says bye. Okay, what's happened to that person while they were there in 3 years? They've definitely developed criminal thinking, because studies show that after 72 hours, you develop criminal thinking in prison. You develop criminal behavior. So they've developed criminal behavior. They may have lost ties with their family. Perhaps their family's embarrassed by what they did, or just don't want anything to do with them. So you come out of prison, and not within 30 days, but immediately within hours, you got to eat. You got to eat. You need shelter. You need somewhere to go. And if you don't have that, chances are you may steal to feed yourself. And if you don't have a job, you may steal for your other basic needs. So restorative justice is very important, so that we basically don't give them an avenue to reoffend.
It really makes sense when you explain it that way. Very practical reasons why restorative justice is better. When and why was the drug court established here in the CNMI? What was going on at that time?
It was established by law in 2015, but just a little background. It actually started with retired Judge Wiseman. When he was on the bench, he recognized the need for treatment courts in the CNMI. The first wave of the meth addiction in the CNMI started in the late 80s, early 90s. And unfortunately, while the rest of the country was combating that through the judicial system, we weren't at that time. Mm-hmm. And so Judge Wiseman did a lot of research, and he started putting together treatment courts. And then he retired, and it fell on my lap, and I had to learn about what treatment courts were about. But I immediately, very quickly became passionate about it. And so I took the initiative to continue what he started, had the law passed and signed into, had the legislation passed and signed into law. And that was in 2015. We put together a team. We put together our policies and procedures. And in December of 2016, we started our first drug court hearing.
Well, we're happy that you're passionate about it, and it kind of shows in the work that you're doing. Big picture, how does it work with the drug court facilitating restorative justice? Okay,
so what happens is, obviously, it's called drug court, and it stems from the criminal court. So a participant will have committed a crime. They come for bail hearing, and they may have gone through a preliminary hearing as well. And then their counsel, their attorney, recognizes that, hey, so-and-so committed this crime because of his underlying drug addiction or her underlying drug addiction. So the defense attorney will write a letter to the Attorney General's office and say, I think this person is eligible for drug court. Please consider him for drug court. The Attorney General's office will then determine whether they are legally eligible, to see what kind of crimes they've committed in the past, or whether they, just basically what their criminal history is.
So there might be some people who are not eligible.
Yes, there are people who are not eligible. People who are not eligible for drug court are people who basically commit crimes against other people. So sexual assault, domestic violence, assault and battery, murder. So basically when there is a victim, those people are generally not eligible for drug court. So the Attorney General's office decides whether they're legally eligible or not. Then they forward that person's name to the adult drug court. The drug court then will assess that person They'll do their assessment, and after their assessment, we send it to one of our clinicians. It could be at the Hope Recovery Center, it could be at CGC, and they will assess them clinically to see whether they actually indeed have an addiction. All of that is then sent back to the drug court. One of the case managers will put everything together, and then we'll present it to the drug court team, which includes the judge, the caseworkers, supervision officers, treatment providers, case managers, DPS, DOC, the drug court manager. We are a huge team of almost 20, if not more, people that get together every Thursdays, and we discuss all of our participants. So that summary of findings, that report will come. I'll look it over. We'll discuss it. The team members will give me input, and at the end of the day, I will decide whether the drug court judge decides whether that person comes into the program or not. The person comes into the program, and then they go through 4 different phases. The first phase is to stabilize them. As I mentioned earlier, when people come out of DOC, there are basic needs that they need right away: food, shelter, medical care. So we stabilize them in phase 1. We apply food stamps for them if necessary. We apply Medicaid for them if necessary. If they're homeless, we find a place for them to stay. If they're not homeless, and 90% of the time our participants are not homeless because it's just the kind of community we have, right? People are willing to take other people, family members in. So we place them at home. We require them to have physical, dental, and eye checkup. When all of that is stabilized, when they have done all of that, and they're not hungry, they're not looking for a place to sleep, and they're healthy, then we start treatment. So phase 1 is just about stabilizing them. And then in phase 2, aggressive treatment, which includes relapse prevention, early recovery skills, social support, possibly anger management. If some of them have co-occurring disorders, we make sure that they see a psychiatrist, get on meds if that's necessary. And then they have to have a certain number of sober days. And then we start helping them look for a job. So they learn how to write a resume, interviewing skills. And then once they do that, we also require them to have, if they don't have a high school diploma, ABE is required. You must get your ABE diploma through NMC. And then after that, we encourage them to either get their AA or BA, or we require them to get a job. After that, they promote to phase 3. Supervision becomes a little less intense. They focus on their job. And then in phase 4, we kind of let go a lot. And I see them less. And we kind of just see them, how they do with their job, how they do in housing. Are they paying rent now? Are they paying their own bills? And how are they doing with that? We talk to them about opening a bank account and budgeting, financial management. You put this much money in your savings account every month. You do this, you pay your bills. This is your play money. This is what you can afford. And we do all of that with our case managers. And then they get to graduate if they're successful. Some of the things that happens in drug court is, because meth is the choice of drug here in the CNMI, and meth generally stays in your system for only 72 hours, we require random drug testing 3 times minimum a week. Every day, the participant has to call a number, and if their color is called, they have to go drug test within a very short period of time. They're given maybe an hour to report to drug court office and be drug tested. And they'll do this for the 2 years that they're in the program. So our participants drug test probably over 500 times before they graduate from drug court. And so
And what happens if they're found positive once?
Okay. If they're found positive once, usually when they're in phase 1, they will test positive because our focus is more on stabilization, as I stated earlier. So they most likely will test positive. And I will maybe sanction them to community work service hours, give them a stern warning, and that's about the extent of it. When they start treatment and they're at a certain point in treatment, then I become more strict. So if they test positive in phase 2, then maybe more community service hours. I may ask them to write a journal. I may ask them to do a certain project, and that'll be their sanction. In phase 3 and phase 4, if they test positive, at this point in time, their brain has healed because they've been in the program long enough, and they should have X number of sober days. They should be done with treatment. They should know how to use the skills that they learn in treatment. And so if they test positive, I could send them to jail. But I recognize that the reason why they're in the program is because they have an addiction. So if they smoke or drink alcohol, I may be less inclined to send them to jail as opposed to if they don't attend treatment. It's a treatment court, so you have to go to treatment. You have to do the things that your case manager tells you to do. So if they don't do those things, the sanctions are harsher than if they smoke, because I know that they're going to smoke. I know that it could happen.
We're talking today about restorative justice and the CNMI Drug Court, and we'll be back with more after this break.
I Northern Marianas Humanities Council bula guinahanya puri historian Marianas dan kultura. Sinyon soda esisihanan formasyon gi zon mami website nmhcouncil.org pat bisita gi YouTube pat Facebook. Guahalokwi diferentes klasen leblu na sinya un fan. I Northern Marianas Humanities Council has uzura todo I experiencia tautau.
Welcome back to Your Humanities Half Hour. We are speaking with CNMI Superior Court Associate Judge Teresa Kim-Tenorio about restorative justice and the CNMI Drug Court. Judge, one of the things you've mentioned is that your approach really, and one you encourage even the community to take, is to really look at the people who enter drug courts as people first, separate from their actions. Also with the understanding that a lot of them have suffered things in their lives that kind of make it more prone that they may develop an addiction. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Okay, so most, if not all of my participants have underlying trauma. For example, with women, it could be sexual assault. It could be domestic violence. It could be abuse in another form. But what I really want for men, let me talk about men too. For them, it could be being bullied in school when they were growing up. It could just be hanging out with the wrong crowd and then wanting to be accepted. But what I would like the community to really focus on when you see someone with an addiction or when you read in the paper about someone who's been arrested is that let's separate their action from the person. So instead of focusing on what they did, instead of saying, oh, that guy is a thief, that lady writes bad checks, instead of focusing on the deed, let's focus on the person and the underlying reason for committing the crime. When I meet my participants for the first time, I really don't know much about them except for what I see on paper and their picture. But the more I get to know them through the program, I actually, when they graduate, I get a little sad and because I've learned so much about them, and I realize that they're really wonderful people who are just victims of circumstance and who were not given the tools, who were not given the opportunity to make the right decisions in their life because of the trauma that they were dealing with or because of life circumstances. And so I would really like the community to focus on the person and not so much on the action that brought them to court.
Would you say you can kind of identify what is the biggest factor or some major factors that when that person has the opportunity to take drugs, that they would have more of a tendency to say yes? Because some people would say, well, I would never take drugs, but not everybody's like that. Is there something in particular you have found that make people step into what then becomes an addiction?
I think what helps is when they have a strong support system. But when you are mentally in a bad headspace and everything is working against you, it's easier to just want to stop the pain and succumb to the temptation.
You were talking before the break about the many steps that are taken in drug court to really, as we say, rehabilitate these individuals, bring them back into the community as part of the community in a healthy way. Are there any other special circumstances the courts consider in this process?
Well, I think all the circumstances that I described are special circumstances. But for example, as far as accepting a person into drug court, some of the things we do consider is if they've had, let's say, an assault or domestic violence case over 10 years ago, then we may look to see if they've had other cases since then. If not, we on a case-by-case basis, I may look at that and decide maybe to accept the person into the program. The other things we definitely have to look at is, do we have the services? Do we have the services that they require in order to help them succeed? Because sometimes we don't. And when we don't, we have to recognize that, because otherwise we're setting them up to fail, right? So for example, let's say that we have a participant with a co-occurring disorder, which is a mental health illness, and they require seeing a psychiatrist. Hypothetically, we do have psychiatrists here, but let's say we didn't have a psychiatrist. Then I shouldn't accept that person into the program, because we're not going to be able to treat that disorder. We're not going to be able to treat the co-occurring disorder, which means he or she will continue to fail. They won't meet the individual goals that we set for them, because they can't take care of that issue. So those are some of the special circumstances that we have to consider.
So what is the success of the program you feel, either the success rates, or what makes people more likely to succeed? And, I ask this question because, as you stated in the beginning, we're part of a community, and these individuals are part of our community. So maybe you can share some thoughts about how we can also, or what works best for them in supporting them.
What works best is staying connected to the fellowship. When we say fellowship, it's a community of other folks in recovery, and they have NA meetings, AA meetings, CMA meetings, crystal meth anonymous meetings.
Okay.
And that's important. That's very important. Having the support from family, friends, and the community. Making amends. Some of these folks, all of them, have to make amends with people that they've hurt in the past because of their drug addiction, and it's important for them to make amends. Some family members and friends are willing to forgive you sooner rather than later. Some of them are not as ready, and it takes a little bit of time. But staying connected is very important. Staying connected and being given the opportunity to prove themselves that they've changed, and that they're working on their recovery, okay? And for the community to understand, and family members, people that they're close to understand that recovery is lifelong. And
I was going to ask that.
I tell my participants that all the time. When you graduate, because you have met all the requirements of drug court, you've gotten your physical, dental, eye, you got a job, you completed ABE, you got 180 sober days. That's the minimum number of sober days you need to graduate consecutive. You have been sanction free. You've, whatever other milestones, goals that we set for them. You've done all of these things, and that's why you're graduating. You're not cured. Okay, I tell them that you're not cured, and your challenge starts tomorrow, because, and I'm taking this from Chief Public Defender Doug Hardig, because he gave this speech once in one of our graduations, and I thought it was, it really hit the, it really stated what the program really is. That, when you go to school, at the end when you graduate, you've taken all the tests necessary, you've passed, and so you graduate. But with drug court, you graduate, and your true test starts the day after. You're not calling in anymore. Officers are not making surprise visits to your home to see how you're doing. You're not drug testing. You're not having to report to your case manager once a week. You're not accountable anymore to the drug court. And so that's when your true test starts. And so I remind the graduates that you have to stay connected to the fellowship, to the meetings, to the recovery groups, because that's important. Because once you let go, once you think you're okay, you think you got it, that's when you can slip, right? And one of the ways I explain to community members who don't have an addiction and who don't understand what this is like is I like to talk about dieting. Here in the CNMI, we all love rice, right? It's a staple. And we have people who become, maybe may develop diabetes or maybe want to lose weight. And they say, I'm going to give up rice. I'm going to give up rice. And they may give it up for a day or two and then they go right back to it. Or they may give it up for 40 days and then they may go right back to it. It's hard, right? And that's what recovery is too, except with them, what's connected to it is the crime. And so people look at them in a negative light. But let's say that you have diabetes and you can't kick it. And you can't kick eating the rice and the sugars and whatever that cause your diabetes. You end up in dialysis. Nobody thinks badly of you. And nobody says, oh, you did it again. Oh, you relapsed. But it's really the same thing, right? It's something. It's a disease that you battle, that you have to control, that you have to manage till the day you die, basically. And so, I would like the community to think about that as well. That it is a disease. It's a brain disease, and it's something that they will have to deal with to the day they die, just like you would a medical illness.
I really want to thank you for your time today and for consolidating such a huge topic in our limited time today, and also for your passion in the work that you do with the drug court. Any final thoughts before we go?
Yes, I want the community to know that drug courts work, treatment courts work. We have an 85% success rate. As of May of this year, the program has been in existence now for almost 6 years, and we've had 72 graduates, 112 total participants since the program has started. My final thought is this: parents, talk to your children about drugs. It's never too early to start. I have children between the ages of 21 and 29. I still talk to them about drugs, even though they're adults. Meth is not something you come back from. It's not something you experiment with. It's deadly. It's serious. So please, parents, I'm all about prevention. If I could, I would put more focus on prevention. Drug court is obviously reactionary. But please talk to your children about drugs. Drug court is a one-time deal. If you graduate from drug court, you can't come back. If you commit another crime, you can't come back to drug court, because it's just like school. If you've completed first 12th grade, you can't be like, I'm going to start again first grade, right? Because it's the same thing. There's nothing new to teach you. So if you graduate from drug court, you can't come back. It's a one-time deal. So embrace the opportunity when you have it. And once again, to the parents, please talk to your children about drugs. It's never too early to start.
Our guest today has been CNMI Superior Court Associate Judge Teresa Kim-Tenorio, talking about restorative justice and the CNMI Drug Court. This has been Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
Your Humanities Half Hour is a production of the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, funded in part by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.